So I wanted to use this presentation to be able to talk about the Bernard Van Leer Foundation a little bit so that you know where we are coming from, why we focus on early childhood, and what we think are some of the ways in which one can really make a difference to the first years, the critical years of a child's life. So the Bernard Van Leer Foundation is a Dutch foundation. We are based in The Hague, and the foundation itself has been working on early childhood since the 1960s. We believe that all children deserve a good start in life, and this is not only the right thing to do according to us, but also the best way to build happy, healthy, and prosperous societies. The foundation started working, as I said, in the 1960s on early childhood, and this was a time when not a lot of people were focusing on young children. At that time, there was not a lot of research to support that there was a lot going on in a child's brain. And therefore, people thought that young children were could be left alone, they were fine on their own. But during that time, some preliminary research started coming in on the fact that there was a lot actually going on in a young child's brain. And so we became one of the early investors in terms of the research on early childhood development, and also in terms of focusing exclusively on early childhood. So we've had a long history in working in this field. This may not be that clear, but basically we've, Bernard Van Leer Foundation, Bernard Van Leer was the founder, and we made a lot of money in packaging. The foundation itself is an international organization now managed by a board of trustees. None of the founders are alive. Through the years, we've worked in 50 countries, but right now we are focused on a set of 9 core countries, and these include, of course, India, and then we are in Israel, in Turkey, in Netherlands, of course, and we are in Ivory Coast, in a few countries in Latin America. We also have a large refugee program that spans Syria and Lebanon for a refugee response program for young children. We also work directly with cities. So there are a set of different cities that we work with under a program that is called Urban 95 that I'll talk about perhaps later during the day. But in India, we are focused on working very closely with 3 municipalities, Bhubaneswar, Udaipur, and Pune. So why early childhood? That's so the slide actually said why early childhood. And the reason we focus on early childhood, as I said, and a lot of you will already know, is that during the early years, a lot seems to be happening with young children. For instance, there is cognitive development, which is the ability to understand cause and effect, to be able to solve problems. Young children are learning their motor skills, how to move, how to walk, how to crawl, how to be able to hold a pen. There is also the linguistic development of being able to recognize and use words. There is socio-emotional development of being able to control emotions and to be able to get along well, let's say, with other children. So almost all of these things that are happening in the brain. And therefore, early childhood development becomes the critical period where some of these changes in the brain are taking, and therefore becomes an area that we feel one should intervene in fairly early. And ECD is a process. So not all children are similar, all children are unique, but the general pattern of development of a child is the same. And therefore, during the early years, the foundational architecture of the brain is laid. And therefore, if you focus on the early years, a young child will be able to have these foundational capacities to be able to navigate life and to be able to go through life with strong skills, some of the skills that I've already described. So this particular picture is of the brain. It's a picture of neural connection and synapses in the brain. So the human brain has hundreds of billions of neural connections, and early childhood is a time when a lot of these neural connections are formed. So think of neural connections, as many of you would already know, as pathways in the brain with synapses which are connecting these pathways. And the more you use a particular pathway, the more that pathway strengthens. And the more you don't use it, the pathway then just becomes disused. And so therefore, in terms of this particular period of time, which is early childhood, for a young child, about 1 million neural connections are being formed per second. And therefore, as you can understand, this becomes a point in time where it becomes critical to be able to support the child. If we can go to the next slide. And so what I just said was that the more you use a neural pathway, the quicker and easier it is to use it again. So this is almost like walking through grass. Of course, on a given day, you may choose to walk through the grass and not through the pathway, but it is easier to be able to use the pathway that you've already built. And of course, it's easier to be able to build that pathway if the grass is green and younger. We can move. So one thing to say is that the brain keeps developing at all stages in life. It's not that brain development stops after the first year, but it's difficult to be able to form these neural connections later on. And it can almost feel like hacking through grass, as in this picture, to be able to establish these neural connections. So it's difficult later on in life, and in the first few years it is the most critical. There are two other, recent research has shown that there are two other points in life where where the brain has increased ability to be able to form these mental pathways, and that is during and through the rapid development of hormones in the body, and this is through adolescence and when one becomes a parent. So there are two other points in life, but the early childhood period is by far the most critical. This particular graph is from the Center for Developing Child at Harvard University. It kind of encapsulates everything that I've just said, which is that the brain's ability to change over time decreases, and you can see the age range. And then you can actually make those changes, but that it would require much more effort later on. You can go to the next one. Now this particular slide shows it's a snapshot of neural connections during the different phases of life. And one thing that could be surprising to many of you may already know this, is that 80% of the brain development would have happened by the time the child is 2 years old. And therefore, if you look at the adult brain and that of a 2-year-old, the neural connections have already formed. And therefore, it is critical to intervene during the first few years of a child's life. And as I said earlier, 1 million neural connections are forming per second. This is from a long-standing study that was carried out by Professor Chuck Nelson from Harvard University as well. And these are snapshots of a brain. This is from the study of brain that is happening. I think it's still continuing in Bangladesh. And the first image of a surviving brain shows you that these neural connections, the brain has not developed properly. So perhaps this child has not received proper nutrition, proper care, a nurturing environment, a safe and secure environment, has not been able to get opportunities to play, and so on. Whereas the second image is of a brain that's surviving, and so you can see that there are neural connections that have formed fully, and it has probably received all of the above, or most of the above. And therefore, you can see that you can see a direct impact in terms of recent research on how the brain develops. One of the most decisive factors, as this slide says, in the quality, in the child's development is the quality of care that the child receives during the early years from a parent or another caregiver. When we say caregiver, we would mean a grandparent, an elder sibling, and so on. So this is one of the most decisive factors, and therefore at the foundation, we try to focus as much as possible on parents and as much as possible on caregivers to be able to therefore support the healthy development of a child. In this slide, you will see that things that like talking, like playing, of course, good nutrition, exclusive breastfeeding during the early months, showing affection, staying calm, are all things that children need to be able to develop and for their brains to develop to their fullest potential. This is brain building. So babies crave interaction. So recent studies have shown, brain scans of children have shown that by the time that they are 3 months, they want to see familiar faces. And in terms of the interactions, when they are speaking or cooing or gurgling, they are craving for your attention, so that when you respond to them, it's actually building their brains. So if parents play peekaboo with children, that is one way to be able to actually build friends. And parents naturally have a tendency to respond to children when children reach out to them. This framework, this is called the Nurturing Care Framework, and there are different things that I've already mentioned that are important for the holistic development of a child. Many of you would be familiar with this: health, responsive caregiving, security, safety, early learning, health. So all of these things need to go well for a child to be able to develop to his or her full potential. This is another way to look at the same thing, and this is more of an ecological approach to looking at children and healthy child development. And in this case, we are looking at children, but we are also looking at the environment that is able to support that child. So therefore, are we providing enough resources? Parents need to have enough resources, they need to have enough time to be able to support their children. Communities need to be able to have enough conditions, empowering conditions that will allow them to support the families, and therefore the families to support the children. And this all needs to be enabled by a set of public policies and programs and services that are able to support the child. But usually what is happening, and this is true for countries all across the world, is that there are a lot of interventions that are planned for children in terms of education programs, nutrition, social protection, and so on. But what one would find is that these are fragmented. A lot of services may be reaching the child, but they may not be reaching but the child may not be getting everything he or she needs to be able to develop fully. And so therefore an integrated approach to be able to cater to children and families is essential. So there was one more comment there, but that's fine. But basically this shows that this shows the multidimensionality of early childhood development, and therefore the policies and services and programs that need to be able to cater through different points in a child's life. It needs to be done in a timely manner, and it needs to be done in an intersectoral manner, which is what I said earlier. So to support the child, the families, and the community. And why do we need to be able to focus on all these things? This may seem like a long list, and we are focusing on one thing. But the reason that it's critical to be able to ask ourselves the question continuously is that, are we promoting early childhood development and brain development? Are we supporting parents to be able to support their children? Are we supporting communities to be able to support their children? The reason for this is that the first few years are critical. A former World Bank president said this best, is that it is essential to be able to level the playing field during the first years. Because if you're able to invest in the first years, the returns on investment are great. You're able to therefore also potentially break the cycle of poverty, and you might be able to also ensure that the child has more productivity and better opportunities later in life. And therefore the next slide, and I think the top title is cut off, is that if you're able to change the beginning, you have an opportunity to change the future. Thank you.